Okay. So I got home today from school and my daughter has a 101.3 temperature and she's got the chills. So that means I'm going to be staying home tomorrow taking care of her. Well, today for you guys. Um, so this is some notes on day 2 of 4.2 and you're going to have a worksheet tonight for homework, and the substitute has those copies ready to go. So we're just going to take some notes. Make sure that you do watch this video because a lot of the stuff that's in this video is on the worksheet. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is how to find tangent. And the biggest thing is that tangent of an angle is going to equal whatever sine is divided by whatever cosine is. So that's kind of a formula that you're going to be using a lot of. So let's look at 30 degrees or pi over 6. The first thing listed is cosine. The second thing listed is sine. Remember, they go in alphabetical order. So if I wanted to find tangent of pi over 6, I would take whatever sine is, so 1/2, divided by whatever cosine is, radical 3 over 2. Okay, well, we don't like all those fractions within fractions. So if you take the top fraction and you multiply by the reciprocal of the bottom fraction, then things will reduce. The 2's will go away, so we'll have 1 over radical 3, which we have to rationalize that denominator by multiplying by radical 3 on top and bottom, and then we'll get radical 3 over 3. So that is tangent at pi over 6. So you might want to add that to your unit circle page, that tangent is root 3 over 3 for 30 degrees or pi over 6. Let's look at tangent of 60 degrees or pi over 3. So if I was doing tangent of pi over 3, I would take sine, which is root 3 over 2, divided by cosine, which is 1/2. And again, take the top stuff, which is radical 3 over 2, and multiply by the reciprocal of the bottom stuff, which is 2 over 1. The 2's cancel, and I just get radical 3. So mark on your unit circle sheet that the tangent of 60, or the tangent of pi over 3, is radical 3. Okay, now look at 45 degrees. If I did sine divided by cosine, I would have something divided by itself. Anything divided by itself is 1. So the tangent of 45 degrees is 1. Look over here. If I did sine divided by cosine, that would be 0 divided by 1, which is 0. Okay, so these are all the tangent values. Up here, if I did tangent, it would be sine divided by cosine. It would be 1 divided by 0, which is undefined. Okay, so now there's symmetry to that whole unit circle with this. So remember, everything in the second quadrant is a negative, comma, positive. So if I do sine divided by cosine, a positive divided by a negative, I'm going to get a negative tangent over in this quadrant, the second quadrant. Down in the third quadrant, everything is negative, negative. So if I do sine divided by cosine, a negative divided by a negative, I'm going to get a positive tangent over in the third quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, everything is a positive, negative. So then when I take sine divided by cosine, a negative divided by a positive will still be a negative. So you can go around your unit circle and add those values in. So here, let's do this really quickly. I'm going to move this over. Okay, hopefully you have all that written down. Okay, so I'm going to move this over. Okay, and we found all these tangents. So this was 1, this was radical 3, up here was undefined, down here was 0, and this one again was radical 3 over 3. Okay, so just use symmetry. So if this was radical 3, then that reflects over to here, but tangent is negative over here, so it would be a negative radical 3. This was a 1, which reflects over here, so tangent will be a negative 1. Tangent will be a negative radical 3 over 3. Tangent would still be a 0. 0 divided by negative 1 is 0. And now just keep reflecting. So if we reflected this tangent over the x-axis, it would go here, but everything, a negative divided by a negative would be positive. So a negative divided by a negative would be a positive 1. Negative divided by a negative would be a positive radical 3. And then it's all symmetry over here. So this would be a negative radical 3, a negative 1, and a negative radical 3 over 3. Those are, oh, and then this one is also undefined because negative 1 divided by 0 is undefined. Okay, so there's all your tangent values. You can add all of those to your unit circle sheet now. Okay, moving on. So if we needed to find the exact value of all 6 trig functions, if we went to pi over 3 on our unit circle, we have the point 1/2, comma, radical 3 over 2. So sine of pi over 3 is the second thing that's listed, and the second thing that's listed is radical 3 over 2. Cosine of pi over 3 is the first thing that's listed, and that's a 1/2. Tangent of pi over 3, we just got done finding, and we found that when we took sine divided by cosine, we got radical 3. Okay, now let's find the rest of them, the reciprocal functions. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So cosecant of pi over 3 would be when you flip this fraction, 2 over radical 3. But we would have to rationalize the denominator by multiplying by radical 3 on top and bottom. So we would end up getting 2 radical 3 over 3. Secant and cosecant are reciprocals. So secant of pi over 3 would just be when you flip this fraction, 2 over 1, which is 2. And cotangent of pi over 3 would be the reciprocal of tangent. So I'm going to flip this, which would be 1 over radical 3. Again, I'm going to have to rationalize the denominator by multiplying by radical 3 on top and bottom. So we would get a radical 3 over 3. So here's cotangent, here's secant, here's cosecant, and then we had our sine, cosine, and tangent. Those would be the 6 trig functions for that given angle. If you were going to do this problem, negative pi over 4, there's no negative 5 pi over 4 on your unit circle, so we would try to find a coterminal angle by adding 2 pi as many times as we needed to. So we would take negative 5 pi over 4 and we would add 2 pi. Well, technically that's 2 pi over 1, and I need a common denominator, so I have to multiply by 4. So that means I have negative 5 pi over 4 plus 8 pi over 4, which would end up equaling 3 pi over 4. That angle is on the unit circle sheet. So let's do sine of 3 pi over 4. Okay, go to 3 pi over 4 on your unit circle sheet. Sine is the second one listed, which is radical 2 over 2. Cosine of 3 pi over 4 is the first thing listed, which is negative radical 2 over 2. And tangent, we already found to be, when you divide sine divided by cosine, anything divided by itself is 1, but we have a negative, so we'd have a negative 1 for tangent. And again, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so we would flip this fraction, so we would have a 2 on the top and a radical 2 on the bottom. But we'd have to rationalize that denominator by multiplying by radical 2 on top and bottom. So we would get 2 radical 2 over 2, the 2's cancel, and we would just get radical 2. Same thing would happen with secant. We would flip this fraction and we would go through this whole process. The only thing different is the negative sign. So we would get negative radical 2. And then cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. Well, if you flip that, I mean technically that's over 1. If you flip it, you still have a negative 1. Okay, moving on. Okay, we're going to do this one. We're going to find secant of 9 pi over 4. Well, first of all, 9 pi over 4 is not on the unit circle. So let's find a coterminal angle that is. Okay, 9 pi over 4 is more than 1 time around the circle. So we're going to go backwards and we're going to subtract 2 pi, which is technically 2 pi over 1, which means we need a common denominator. So we got to multiply by 4 on top and bottom. So 9 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4 would be pi over 4. So we can think of this as just doing secant of pi over 4, which is much easier to do because pi over 4 is on the unit circle. Well, secant is the reciprocal of which one? Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So if we find cosine of pi over 4, go to pi over 4. The first one listed is radical 2 over 2. Okay, so if we're going to do secant, we're going to flip that, and we would have 2 over radical 2, which, again, we would have to rationalize that denominator, multiplying by radical 2 on top and bottom. So we would get 2 radical 2 over 2. 2's cancel, so we get radical 2 for the answer. So if you're told to find secant, what you might want to do is find cosine first and then just flip it. You don't have to, but it's an option. Okay, there's some more notes to cover, but this program only lets me record in 15-minute segments, so I'm almost up on the time for this first video. So click on video number 2, finish up the last few examples, and then you can get to work on the worksheet. There's still stuff to talk about that's on the worksheet, so make sure that you do watch video number 2. Okay, thanks.